CyberTalks TV, presented by Cyberscoop and brought to you by Google Cloud, McAfee, and Raytheon Intelligence and Space.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. This is CyberTalks TV presented by Scoop News Group. I'm Jeff Stone, the editor-in-chief of cyberscoop.com. Our show tonight is going to bring you a range of conversations filmed during CyberTalks, our annual summit of decision makers from throughout the government and the private sector. In a series of discussions, you'll hear about the latest trends in hacking, cybercrime, data protection, and the way that these issues are starting to affect our daily lives, for good and bad. Foreign governments and motivated, well-resourced criminal gangs are using emerging technologies to gather intelligence about our lives, steal intellectual property from American companies, and carry out ransomware attacks against targets like hospitals. As COVID-19 spread throughout the US, both scammers and foreign spies have tried to disrupt research efforts, either to make a buck or to gather information about vaccine research that they could take home. We'll learn more about all of that tonight and more during a conversation between Cyberscoop reporter Shannon Vavra and Tanya Ugoretz, the Deputy Assistant Director in the FBI's Cyber Division. That's a big job. We'll also hear from a team of election security officials working inside the government to make sure that Americans' votes are submitted and counted in a trustworthy, secure way on November 3rd. Thanks again for joining us.
So the next topic I'd like to throw out to you guys is, if we think about information or misinformation that's out there regarding either the election security or just the general concerns around the elections, as you guys well know, obviously, people going through and trying to understand how they feel confidence in their vote, the vote's going to be counted, or confidence in the general election, whether these concerns are real or perceived. A lot of the information that's out there are driving some of the public opinion. So what advice, or whether it's technologies or best practices, or how for registered voters to deal with the sorting through all this type of information, guidance can you give them? I'll throw it out. Who would like to jump in first? I'll let you guys pick who wants to go first.
I'll jump in with a first and foremost fundamental. The National Association of Secretaries of State has really taken the lead this year on a Trusted Info 2020 effort. It's a big deal. There's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there, both foreign adversaries, but also, well-meaning people. The reality is social media doesn't stop at the state line. And so what may be good for you, for somebody in one state, isn't right for you in another state. And so it's important to get people to that trusted source information, which is absolutely their state or local election official. We want people to engage, but there are deadlines that matter. There are procedures that matter. And the person that is the right person to get that information from is your state or local election official.
Yeah, John, I'll build on a little bit of what Chairman Hovland just said. From our perspective at CISA, our work is focused and has started with the state and local officials, and then the private sector that supports them, creating a community of practice, and then empowering them to go talk to their voters, right? In the end, elections are run at the state and local level for a reason. That reason is so that citizens can engage directly with those who run the process, right? So if they have questions, if they have concerns, going and engaging directly with those trusted sources of information that Ben mentioned, secretaries of state, your local election administrator, is really critical because it varies so much state to state. And the best way to do that is to serve as an election worker. There's still time in many states, but even if you can't do that, if you don't feel safe, there's plenty of opportunities to watch pre-election testing of systems, to participate as an observer, and to engage directly with those who run it. Many election offices now even run Facebook Live or live streams of counting processes and tabulation to open up the process so that there's some transparency. And in the end, for this election, amidst COVID, really what we at CISA and the EAC have really been trying to engage voters around is being a 3P voter. And what's that? First is being a prepared voter, having a plan, understanding what your options are to vote, knowing how you want to engage with the process, knowing that you're registered, what's on your ballot, and what the experience is going to be like, because it's different perhaps in your jurisdiction than ever before. So understanding, having a plan, a prepared voter is a resilient voter. The second is a voter that is patient. We know that some of the processes are changing. We know there's expansion of absentee or mail-in voting or additional options for in-person voting. And as election administrators have worked quickly to do this, you may have to have patience while you're waiting to receive your ballot, or at the early voting site while you're socially distanced 6 feet apart, or for election night results and completing election night results. None of that means there's anything wrong with the process. It means that election officials are ensuring that it's both accessible, secure, and safe for voters to go and engage. And then finally, a participating voter, a voter that's engaged, that's asking the questions, that's talking to the local election officials in order to have confidence. And one key metric on all of this that we really like to highlight is in 2016, 85% or so of ballots cast were auditable, had a corresponding auditable record. This year, we anticipate 92% or more of ballots cast will be on an auditable record. And so we have the ability now, more so than we did in 2016, and many states have moved off of unauditable systems towards auditability. We have the ability, if we need to have transparent audits, efficient audits to ensure that votes are counted as cast. And so understanding those options and improving the auditing process is a real focus for us, not just this year, but moving forward.
Hello, I'm Shannon Vavra, a reporter at CyberScoop, and you're watching CyberTalks TV. Joining me today is the Deputy Assistant Director in the FBI Cyber Division, Tanya Ugaritz. Thank you for being here with us today, Tanya.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to turn our attention to something that's weighing heavily on the American public these days, the coronavirus vaccine. The urgency to roll out a vaccine is growing by the day. Hundreds of thousands of Americans have already died from the deadly virus. The President of the United States has been infected with the virus at this point as well. And the pressures facing the scientists working on coronavirus vaccine research are very high. There's pressure politically to roll out a vaccine. There's scientific hurdles to meet. But on the hacker front, there's also some cybersecurity threats they face. As the FBI knows very well, there's foreign government hackers that have been targeting coronavirus vaccine research and COVID-19 related research for months now. And as CyberScoop has first reported, the Department of Defense, alongside the HHS, Department of Homeland Security, and the FBI are all working on the security and assurance portion of what the government is working on, called Operation Warp Speed, to roll out a vaccine by January with 300 million doses of a vaccine. Now, Tanya, I wonder if you could walk us through what the FBI's role is in dealing with companies who may be targeted by foreign hackers right now, and what they can expect when they engage with you.
Yes, and as you noted, this is something unfortunate that we became aware of almost as soon as the pandemic began, that at the time when we would want our researchers to be 100% focused on what they need to do scientifically to develop a safe and secure vaccine as quickly as possible, you're right that we have seen, for example, some of the most sophisticated and prolific hackers from China, for example, targeting our research institutions, our laboratories, and our universities who are focused on this COVID research. And sometimes we would see this activity very soon after one of those institutions made a public announcement that they were involved in that type of research. So we immediately knew, in talking with our US government partners in DHS and in Health and Human Services, that we needed to do something rapidly to make sure that at the same time that these researchers were focused on developing a vaccine, they weren't simultaneously having to divert attention to defending their networks against these nation-state hackers. So what we immediately did with those government partners is a few things. One, we started public information campaign, sharing what we were learning from observing this activity with entities in those sectors so that they knew what to be on the lookout for and could harden their networks. So we did that first to those organizations that we saw being targeted. And then soon thereafter, we expanded the message more widely so that the public would be aware that this activity was occurring. You may remember that in May, we took what's an unusual step for us in putting out a public service announcement with DHS, alerting the public to this activity. And we did that for two reasons. One, just to make the public and the research institutions aware that this was happening, but also to put the actors behind this activity on notice, that we could see what they were doing and that we thought it was unconscionable. This really undermines, for example, in the case of China, their arguments to be a trusted and effective international partner, when at the same time, when we all should be working together to promote and protect this vaccine research, they are effectively undermining it by trying to steal it.
Thank you. And since you put out that alert, and the Department of Justice has also called out some Ministry of State Security hackers from Chinese intelligence services related to some of their efforts to target coronavirus vaccine research. Since those two announcements, have you seen any sort of change from the Chinese posture in terms of targeting? Has it had a demonstrable effect to make these sorts of announcements?
I can't speak specifically to what we've seen in intelligence since that time, but I can tell you that the types of actors we see who engage in this type of intrusion activity and theft of US intellectual property are persistent. Typically, if they're thwarted through one means of getting access to something that they're interested in, they will persist and find other ways. So we are alert to that and working very closely with our other government partners. And you mentioned Operation Warp Speed at the outset. We've kind of taken those early efforts from March of this year, where we were collaborating with DHS and Health and Human Services, and we've kind of rolled those into the larger Defense Department effort, Operation Warp Speed, to make sure that we're all talking with each other, we're all sharing information, and as soon as we see any indications of some activity that might threaten research, that we're engaging with those entities that are either being targeted or face a potential compromise, and sharing with them as quickly as we can.
Now, from the geopolitical perspective here, walk us through a little bit about the US assessment about why an adversary may be interested in targeting coronavirus vaccine research. Is it the data? Is it the manufacturing side of things? Is it about financial interests? Tell us a little bit about the US perspective there.
I think it's all of the above. I mean, as you mentioned, there's just an enormous amount of pressure around the world in every country to try to secure an effective and safe vaccine as quickly as possible. And we all have that shared interest, and ideally this would be a shared collaborative effort. But we also can assess that for some countries, there's some geopolitical competition around it as well. And there will be a certain amount of prestige as well as financial incentive to being first to market, as well as potentially even some control of the delivery of whoever has that first vaccine. So I am not a vaccine expert, but I think we can all say that we want whatever vaccine is developed to be safe, to be widely available, to be secure, and to be something that the American people in particular can have confidence in.
And from the FBI perspective, a lot of what you will focus on sort of broadly is the criminal investigative side of things when it comes to hackers. Can Americans expect more indictments related to coronavirus vaccine research, targeting, and hacking in the coming months?
Well, I think it really just depends on where the intelligence and our investigations take us. Indictments are one tool in the US government toolbox to identify when we see activity that does violate the law, to hold the people responsible accountable. But they're only one tool. And the way that we approach these threats is really through a whole of government approach. So it may be in something like the theft of coronavirus research. If we have information that can lead to charges and a criminal indictment, we may pursue that. but there also may be other government agencies who have different tools that they can use, either to call out the activity publicly, to impose other risks and consequences on the actors responsible, or to take some sort of action that might not be public. And so our focus is really on collaborating with our other government partners, our partners in foreign law enforcement as well, to see who is it in any certain circumstance who has a tool available to impose the maximum impact on these actors who are violating the law, violating international norms.
And that actually brings me to my next question, which is sort of speaking about holding hackers accountable. The FBI recently rolled out a new cyber strategy, and it's something that the FBI has interviewed exclusively with CyberScoop on for an exclusive about this strategy. Could you tell us a little bit about what that looks like and what it's all about?
Sure. I think sometimes when it comes to cyber, there's a desire to know who in the government is responsible for holding both nation states and cyber criminals accountable for the intrusions that they're conducting into US networks. And those can be against individual members of the US public, some of our research institutions like we've just discussed, and the US government can be a target of this activity as well. It would be great to have a simple answer to who's in charge, but the reality is, cyber intrusions are complex. We're talking really about, when we talk about the threats we're most concerned about, these are foreign actors using global infrastructure to conduct intrusions into US networks. And because of the nature of the activity, there's really no single agency that can combat it on their own, either in the US or around the world. So when we were looking at our cyber strategy, we wanted to focus on what is it that the FBI can uniquely bring to this effort. And the strategy really is focused on imposing risk and consequences on our cyber adversaries. And what that means is raising the cost to them, to actors, whether it's a criminal or somebody working on behalf of a foreign government, who until recently seemed to feel like they can conduct this activity with relatively little risk to themselves, that they can steal intellectual property, that they can intrude on our critical infrastructure networks, and do that without paying a price. And that's a risk calculus that we really think needs to change. And our strategy focuses on what can the FBI uniquely bring to this fight. And what we settled upon is that there's a few things. One, by virtue of being the country's lead domestic law enforcement and intelligence agency, we have a unique domestic presence and authorities whereby we can collect evidence not only from investigations, but also through intelligence, and we're part of the intelligence community. And we can have unique insight that way into not only what our adversaries' intentions are, but what they're actually doing to carry out intrusions on US networks. That's an important piece of helping the US government identify who's responsible for the intrusions we see, what we call attribution in the cyber community. And knowing who's responsible is the first step to holding them accountable. So we use those unique authorities, not just to pursue an indictment, but to share information with the rest of the US government and with our foreign partners that they can also use to support their operations. So as I said, an indictment or a law enforcement action like taking down adversary infrastructure, it might be a way to combat this activity, but it's not the only way. So it's really important that we share the information that we uniquely collect with the rest of the US government and our partners to support their actions as well. We're also increasingly bringing together those other government actors to sequence how we're fighting against these threats. So just FBI indicting someone or the US Treasury Department sanctioning someone individually might not have the impact that we want, but when we work together and we can coordinate and sequence those operations, that's when we really start to have the impact we're looking for.
Yeah, so I wonder if you could walk us through that a little bit more. Something the FBI has said publicly in recent weeks is that the FBI will be working increasingly with spy agencies, including the NSA, the CIA, under one roof at something called the NCIJTF. How do you plan on balancing the different priorities of intelligence collection and then prosecution, announcing charges, announcing sanctions against actors who may then become intimately aware of the kinds of accesses that the intelligence community may have to hackers? How are you going to balance those priorities moving forward?
I think the key there is that it's not the FBI's decision on how to balance them. It's a decision with our partners. So what it means is that we have these longstanding trusted working relationships with our partners in other agencies. You know, the cyber community, I think it's, you know, by comparison, maybe with some other areas of the government, it's a fairly small community. I think everyone knows each other. Everyone is passionate about defending against cyber threats. And by working together for a long time, especially in places where we're co-located, like the National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force, those are the conditions you really need to have those honest conversations about when is it a good idea to maybe risk some of the information collection that we have in order to be able to take an action that's going to disrupt something that, you know, a foreign actor is doing that we think disrupting that action outweighs the risk. It's a very nuanced, it's a conversation that, you know, there is no easy answer in a lot of cases, and it really is a case-by-case basis. But it's by bringing everyone together, talking about the impact we're collectively trying to achieve, talking about different options we have to achieve that impact, and weighing that risk and benefit is really the kinds of conversations that, you know, we host in that environment.
Now, speaking of sharing information on threats and hackers, I want to turn the conversation to something that Americans are thinking about in the coming weeks ahead, Election Day. We know that the Office of Director of National Intelligence has shared information about how Russia wants to primarily denigrate Joe Biden, how China would prefer that President Trump not win re-election, and how Iran seeks to undermine Trump, as well as American institutions, and sort of sow some division and chaos in our political process. Now, the FBI is the lead federal agency on investigating these kinds of foreign interferences. Now, tell us a little bit about what the American public can expect on election night, and what we should be expecting sort of in terms of results moving forward.
Yeah, the security of the US election is among the top priorities of the FBI, as our director has stated numerous times publicly. Americans have to have confidence in our voting system and that our election infrastructure is secure. And you're right, the FBI is the primary investigative agency when it comes to cyber activity against election infrastructure, election-related crimes, foreign influence operations, etc. And we just can't tolerate any foreign interference in US elections. So I think you're right that election night probably will look a little bit different than what the American public is used to. And I think knowing that and being prepared for it is really key. You know, in our kind of modern times, we're used to instantaneous information. And on election night, we've become accustomed, I think with the exception maybe of the election in 2000, of having instantaneous results. But we all know that we're operating in a little bit different environment here in 2020 with the impact of the pandemic and the adjustments that our state and local election officials have had to make because of that. So we know, for example, that more Americans will probably choose to vote by mail or vote via absentee ballot. Every state, every locality has a little bit different system and timeline for counting ballots. The bottom line is, Americans will need to be patient. We are confident in the security of the election, but we want to ensure that the American public is patient in waiting for the results of that election as well. And that may mean that we don't know the results on election night. That's kind of hard to anticipate. But what we also don't want to do is give our foreign adversaries the opportunity to provide disinformation, to sow discord, to introduce doubt by implying that any delay past election night is somehow an indicator of something nefarious. That's not the case. I think going to trusted sources of information like FBI.gov and CISA.gov, which is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, these are places where you can find information about what to expect on election night and what types of malicious activity to be on the lookout for so you can recognize it and know it when you see it. We in DHS have been issuing a series of public service announcements identifying just those types of scenarios. And the common theme through all of those announcements is that while foreign actors may try to undertake activity that would have a temporary impact on availability of results or something like that, it's not likely to have an actual impact on your ability to vote or on your vote being counted. So we counsel the American people to be patient, look for those trusted sources of information, educate yourself in advance by looking at trusted sources such as those public service announcements to know what to expect. And we're confident that as a result, we'll have a secure election.
I want to ask you one more question about that space and sort of the days following Election Day in November. In the past, we've seen actors from foreign governments and emanating from foreign countries, including in Russia, targeting sort of the release of information, sort of vote tallies that you're talking about. We've seen that entities in Russia targeting that presidential election in Ukraine in 2014. Walk us through what Americans should look for on websites when they're looking for official information, either on election night or in the days following Election Day.
So again, I would encourage the American people to be in touch with their local election officials, look at websites like FBI.gov and CISA.gov for that information on where are those trusted sites to go to. Your local and state election officials really are the best sources for that information. And those are the folks that you should look towards for that type of information.
Wonderful. Well, that is just about all the time we have. So I want to thank Tanya for being here with us today. And I hope everybody enjoys the rest of CyberTalks this week.
And that's our show. Thank you again for joining us tonight on CyberTalks TV, presented by Scoop News Group. We'll be back again tomorrow. In the meantime, I hope you'll check us out on cyberscoop.com, where we cover all the topics on the show tonight and a lot more. You can also follow us on Twitter at CyberScoop News and sign up for our daily email newsletter to keep up with the latest coverage around big-time data breaches, cybercrime, the evolution of disinformation on social media, and the way technology is shaping our interactions with the world, both good and bad. For Shannon Vabra, Sean Lingus, and all of us here at CyberScoop, thanks again for your time. This is Jeff Stone signing off.
Thanks for watching CyberTalks TV, brought to you by Google Cloud, McAfee, and Raytheon Intelligence and Space.